So, people, tonight's guest is someone very special. He's worked on quite a few well-known movies as an assistant director, assistant editor, and he's transitioning into an editor. And most of those titles are films that every single one of us we've seen. So, he's worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers 2, some tiny little movie called Marvel's Avengers.
Very small.
Very small movie.
Yeah. You may have seen like a hero box or something. That's about it.
Yeah. And his IMDb portfolio is pretty impressive. So, Tommy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. Very
Yes,
exciting.
it is.
Yes.
Awesome. So, Tommy, could you? Sorry.
Sizzling conversation for everyone watching.
100%.
Yeah.
Tommy, so could you give us a little bit, a small intro about like how you got into filmmaking?
Sure. It's a loaded question. So, I was born on basically, I worked on a ton of American Film Institute projects on the side, cycle projects, and I was able to learn each emphasis, right? I know I wanted to get into movies. I love movies growing up, as I'm sure you have. We're all, movie buffs and fanatics. So I always wanted to get in the industry. I just didn't know what I wanted to do specifically, so I had to learn each craft, or at least observe it, right? And then from there, I ended up actually post-supervising one of their thesis films, and I was able to work, exclusively with the editor. As you know, as a director, you're in there for you're like family. You become family, so you get very close, and so that's where I was like, you know what, this is where you make a movie. In my opinion, this is how you shape it, or chisel it like a sculpture, right? So then I took it upon myself. I graduated from Cal State Northridge, California State University in Northridge, California. And at the same time, I was going to New York Film Academy. So I was doing both at the same time because I really wanted to make sure that was it. That's the emphasis I wanted. And I did actually get into the filmmaking program in Cal State Northridge, surprisingly. It was a multimedia production, which is like web design. So that's why I sought out in New York Film Academy, because I'm like, well, they have to accept anybody there. So that's where you learn. But from there, my biggest advice to everybody who's watching, who's starting out and trying to break in or find ways to break in, for me, I think it's crucial that you look into internships when you're in universities, because that's a way for you to sort of get in the door. And for me, I looked at it as an investment. Once I graduate, that I have a job in the business, whatever it is, and hopefully in post, even more specifically in editing. So for me, I got into Lionsgate feature post-production. I was able to work with the head of post there. And I ended up assisting him. I got promoted pretty quickly, but I got the job once I graduated, which was great. I interned there, and then they hired me. So from that, I, networked, as we do in this business. It's who you know, right? And I got to know people who worked at Transformers 1. So that's when I jumped ship from Lionsgate to get into editorial, like an editorialist or an editorial production assistant, or what have you. But that's where it was like I was thrown into the deep end to really, assist 4 editors at once simultaneously, because Michael Bay likes to use many at once. And, he likes to use the cream of the crop in business all at the same time. Bear no expense, obviously. And but that for me was 4 different. And again, I always look at what's next. Where's that going to take me? So for me, that was 4 different outlets, 4 different opportunities after Transformers. So I got offers for I think it was A-Team and Karate Kid was one, I think, and a couple other big features. And Thor was one of them, was what I chose. So the timing just worked out perfectly. So and I always was a huge Marvel fan growing up. So I mean, I collected the cards, read the comics, so I was very knowledgeable of that universe, yeah, of the MCU, basically. So to me, it was a no-brainer. So I jumped into Thor, and then luckily that crew then was brought on to the first Avengers. So it's the exact same, and I learned the ropes there. But again, I'm very ambitious, so I tried. So I was technically promoted on Thor as like a second assistant editor, right, under the first, who kind of runs the editing room, right? The first assistant editor runs the room. And so I wanted to move up as quickly as possible. It takes a long time sometimes when you're on big movies like that to move up. It really does. So the first assistant on the first Avengers got an opportunity, his editorial debut, to cut the first Purge movie. And I asked him, I was like, "Have an assistant?" He's like, "I have no idea. I've never done this before." So I'm like, "Well, take me." And it was a hard decision for me because I was like the precipice, right? It was the top of my game on the Avengers. It was towards the end. We were heading into the final sound mix. So within the last like 4 months, luckily I got permission from, you know, I wanted to make sure I was on good terms to do it. Kind of their decision to let me go. I didn't just like jump ship and burn that. Very important to me. I didn't. So I got the head of basically the visual effects at Marvel. She was the head of post as well, Victoria Alonso. She was a big part of bringing me up as well in the Editors Guild, you know, of the Editors Guild when I was on Thor. And so I got permission to go to the first Purge movie as a first assistant editor. So I got jumped up as quickly as possible, and I ended up VFX editing, which that's another whole other position usually, but I dipped in both. Just totally jumped in the deep end because I was second assistant to firsting and VFX editing at once, which is databasing a lot of shots and comping a lot of shots, compositing, visual effects work, and sometimes in many cases on low budget films you end up finaling a lot of shots too. So I ended up finaling shots from that point on like every movie I've worked on. You know, whether it's small amount or a large amount, but I ended up finaling actual visual effects shots, which is kind of unheard of. But again, ambitious. So
definitely, yeah. I mean, talk to me a little bit about like I mean, The Avengers. That was like one of the biggest movies at the time. Still is. So when it came to a movie that massive, how did the whole background that you had with VFX help out?
That's the one thing that was it's a good question. That's one thing that's also I suggest to recommend to your viewers as well when they're breaking in is trying to find something that's an asset for you that not many other people have in the business. You will get hired over others that are more experienced in the business if you have a specific skill set in, for instance, visual effects, which obviously we know in all these large-scale projects requires visual effects work, which temping is very important. Knowing how to temp shots, during the post-production and production process while they're shooting, before they go out and start getting turned over to the visual effects vendors, because it is the Bible for the guide for the filmmaker to wrap his head around too of what's happening in the geography of the shot and to direct the visual effects vendor of what happens in the shot. And the temp is what does that. It instructs them. It makes their job easy in a lot of ways. There's not as much explaining. The visual is there. The visual cues are there, and you're working hand in hand with post visualization and previs. That's another topic. Anyway, so yeah, my suggestion on your question is when I was in Cal State North, the one thing I will say I got out of it, believe it or not, had nothing to do with the major at all. It was I had to get like an introduction course to After Effects. So I learned After Effects and then, the basics. And then I sort of enhanced that with tutorials and just do it on my own to sort of figure it out and enhance myself so that I became like an asset essentially. And I did like really good, I ended up doing really good sound work. I was able to do great sound work. We primarily work in as a composer on these shows because the media management is so important, and there's so many bugs and issues I know with other other programs and other software. So for that robust kind of work, it's very supportive on a technological standpoint, and also just organization, straight organization. And, so yeah, knowing Avid, understanding all the track assignments and sound effects, rubber banding, which like mapping out the audio, keyframes and stuff like that. And also knowing Avid for comps, because there's a lot of times editors prefer, if you're an editor, they prefer for you to build a lot of the comps in the time, because they're not limited with the amount of footage that you use out and After Effects and import it, because now you're limited. I usually do 8-frame handles, like if you give it to 8-frame, handles outside of the confines of the edit on either side. So they have wiggle room, but sometimes it's just not enough, and they just prefer to have it. They get frustrated and want it in the Avid. So my recommendation, visual effects, no After Effects. It's so helpful, and it makes you that much more important to hire over others that are more experienced, like 20 years in business.
Sure.
True.
You mentioned like switching through footage and everything before. So let's take a movie like Transformers, for example, and Michael Bay has this very specific cutting style where no shot probably lasts more than 2 seconds.
Oh,
so
yeah.
How do you like go through all that footage that's shot? How do you know which one, what to put in, what to take out? Like, how does that process work? I'm trying to figure out like how your brain works when you're cutting a Michael Bay movie.
He's a unique beast, that one, because he shoots a lot of footage, obviously, and he shoots himself too. Like there's camera work, that's his own camera work, a lot of his handheld too, and oftentimes because he's moving so fast, he doesn't slate a lot. So from an assistant standpoint, it's very hard to sort of wrap your head around it, because you feel bad for the editor, because you got to be able to delegate as much information, or disseminate as much information to them as possible. They have to know everything. And they have a line script, sure, and script supervisors there to provide that information, well, to line the script. But he's moving so fast, it's hard to keep track of. So, so for me, I'd have to organize in a way that makes sense. Like as an assistant, I have to go into it as like an editor, right? Where it's like, okay, how would I, if I were to receive this footage, how can I make sense of it, of this massive amount of material? And that's just his style of editing too. You have to know that going into it, where it's going to be like a frame, gone, next shot, frame, gone, next shot. He's like an AD, he's got like ADD, it's just it's a kid with a toy. He's just,
that's
and
it
shows, product shows. But it's also, in his mind, I could see his stylistic approach as being like a less is more, sometimes too less, oftentimes. But it's ultimately the word cinematic, right? Where it feels larger than life, because the amount of coverage that he has, it's like an illusion. He can take something that's so small, one filmmaker does one thing and he does something completely different. And you freeze on a frame, a Michael Bay shot. Like, it's very distinct in his style, obviously his color choices, but you notice every shot he picks basically if there's several angles or setups or whatnot, he will pick a very specific area of that shot that he likes, right? And he wouldn't stretch it out. He's not one of those guys like a Scorsese where he let it sit and rest, or steep in that for a little while. He doesn't do that.
He doesn't do that, yeah.
Obviously, but that's just how it's commercial filmmaking, ultimately. He comes from a photographer's background. I remember when I was archiving, one of my jobs is I had archived all of his stuff before he became Michael Bay, and database it, and I went through all these things, and he was a commercial filmmaker, like literally commercials. If you remember Scott Miller commercial, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Aaron Burr one. That's
it.
Start. And music video as well, like that was his progression into movies until Bruckheimer gave him his debut ultimately, Bad Boys. But you could tell, like, even then, he had a very, even by flipping through the photos that he had, very specific approach, and it just looked larger than life. So he knows what he's doing. Not a lot of people can. You just have to know when you're cutting. Usually, it's a pedigree that has been with him for a while, and it's been handed down to other assistants or co-editors or associate editors or what have you. So they know he likes to hire people that are a step ahead of him, essentially. You know, that sort of know what he expects. You know, because otherwise it just could get nasty really fast. As you can
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, you know, yeah, go ahead.
So you cut a lot of action, and you move into horror as well. So you've done The Purge. I mean, you can classify that as horror, I guess. And you recently did another horror movie, which was more independent. So I find these two genres very, you know, they're very dependent on editing. I mean, every genre is, but these genres more so, at least in my opinion, because the difference between something that's impactful or something that's really scary can be just one frame. So as an editor, like, how do you, you know, could you tell me a little bit about, like, the importance of a single frame when it comes to making or breaking a shot?
Yeah, I mean, it really, believe it or not, what's actually most important to be considerate of when you're cutting horror or thriller or any, this can be applicable to any genre. But it's not actually necessarily what you think is within the cut footage that they shoot for, within the action that they shoot for. As an editor, it's very important to actually look outside of that, because there's some key moments that are outside before they roll, you know, before they say action and after they say cut. There's so many things and so many great things in that. The camera is frenetic, and like getting positioned and stuff like that are just golden little nuggets to emphasize a certain moment or to make it like it's a POV or something frantic that makes you feel uneasy or uncomfortable. That's also distracting, but for the best reasons, right? You have to know when to use them. When they're shooting film, it would be like a film out, for instance, would be a nice transition where it go, and it would be like a blowout, and you could use that and emphasize that even more with a nice sound effect, which could end up becoming like everything you do is inspirational for the betterment of the movie, right? Even in temporary standpoint. So if it was like a blowout thing, you could find like a little motif maybe of the sound design that makes you feel recognizable something coming. Like if you introduce a certain villain or character or entity or something that makes you feel discomfort as the movie progresses, right? So all these things that inspire you. And I have to say, actually outside of the action sometimes where you find some of those golden moments. Now, building for horror, what you do is you want to find because you don't want to sort of oversaturate people, right, with or inundate them to the point where it's like desensitizing for a jump scare. It has to build. So you have to stretch it out that circles around one core moment that is the ultimate scare, right? Everything builds around that.
Yep.
How can you build around that and stretch it out? So for me, I would start there. You know, I would start with this. Is your guide is like when you're reading it, your initial feeling of discomfort of like, oh my god, and then oh my god, that is the core moment where you want to sort of build up towards. You don't want to make everything important, everything seem important. You know, that's what's important for a horror. Then it's gonna overstay it, and it's not gonna be interesting to watch. Yeah. And that's what makes for the best films, honestly. You know, at least in my opinion. So that's what I try and create. You know, when cutting a horror or a thriller. I mean, it's all psychological. You know, and it is a lot of the horrors is playing with the with the psychological aspect of it. You have to play with people's minds and kind of like, you know, give it to them, then pull it away, and pull it away. Don't just give it all.
Basically, filmmaking itself, like the art of editing, is basically you're playing with the person's psyche, like you said. It's all about psychology, how the audience interprets what you're putting across, and you gotta be the audience before it goes to the audience. So
Exactly. Well, the cutting, that's what I also do when I'm cutting is the first audience is my assistants, you know, or my assistant. Like that's my first audience before it goes to the director because I have to be 100% confident before I send it out to the director. And
yeah,
and I would send it when I'm cutting. It's very important for me to send that. It's up to the director. Every director has a preference, and some don't have as much time as others. But when they're shooting principal, we're cutting alongside of them, and I would send them cut reference every time to make sure this is what their vision really should be, so that when they sit down, to me, the assembly is so important to start the post-production process because if it falls apart there, it should have a bad vibe for a long period of time to sort of repair yourself from that viewing, which we all know could be overwhelming because it has everything in there.
yeah,
You know, in the assembly. So it could be overwhelming for a director to sit down. You want to make sure that they sit down and they're like, you know, like I've washed up on shore. This feels like there's something in there, right? Instead of, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? Which happens. So I want to make sure that they're extremely comfortable going into it. And that is, and to me, it starts with developing a relationship while they're shooting. You're sending them cuts and it's like, this is on the right track. Or if it's not, it's slightly off, then they give you input and you incorporate that in the assembly. So there's not wasted time in their 10-week director cut, which for DGA. Director is 10 weeks. Primary, I mean, sometimes it varies depending on the.
that's brilliant. Yeah.
But yeah, you want to make sure you incorporate their notes so that they feel that much more comfortable. I hope I answered your question.
You did. You did. I was actually going to move into something a little bit kind of different, but Harvey's got an amazing question which kind of relates to what I was going to ask. So he's asking, can good editing fix bad acting? Now, I think you and I spoke about this before, where the editor, you know, we both agree that the editor is very responsible for the performance that gets left in the movie. So,
sure.
Tell me a little bit about that.
And yeah, like I said when I was talking about Bay, with less is more. This is a different application, right? Less is more. In this case, where you show only those moments, and this is what I was saying earlier too. Is outside, believe it or not, when it's bad acting, when do they let loose? When do they feel relaxed? Well, outside of the take. So oftentimes you steal performances outside of the action, and it makes them like feel natural and yeah, just more natural in their performance of playing. And sometimes just playing themselves is what the character really is. And it's outside, unfortunately, of that action.
Yeah.
So, and you can do that with off-camera things too. Just as long as their dialogue delivers, you could, you know, and you could. That's the beauty of not showing them, is you could hack up their dialogue, you know, 50,000 ways to Sunday. You know what I mean? Where it makes it feel like they're not forgetting their lines. Which, by the way, that happens in large-scale films too, with actors who are up there. And I won't say who. But in many instances, there's some actors I've worked with too that have even
earpieces, yeah.
And people them the lines. So, and you'd never, if I told you, you'd be like, what? You'd be like, I can't believe that. How is he so amazing? Or she's so amazing? But there are a lot of actors that do that. And to feed them the lines. I can't wrap my head around, how can I perform while somebody's talking to me? That seems difficult to me, but they do it, and it's whatever works for them. But yeah, to answer your question, it's a lot of times it's outside of the take, and also less is more in terms of hiding them but keeping their voice, obviously. So you're going to be on somebody else, or you're going to be on them for longer because I notice for bad acting sometimes it's when they're not delivering the line so much, it's when they're just listening for something. So a lot of times, like, I'm always stealing, you know, from other areas of the film that are not intended. So there could be a performance from something that, for like some scene that was really intense in the third act, and in the first act, it's just enough to make it feel uncomfortable within the situation in that moment of the script, right? Or of the progression of the story. So you can feel that moment where, you know, they feel intense, and in that scene, it makes it feel like, well, something's off about this person. Even though they're acting for that, they don't feel naturally off for that moment. They're just like, you know, because they don't know how to play that part as well. You have to steal some things, you know. It's just what you do, and sometimes you would scramble and have the assistant. Is another thing you delegate is like, build me a whole sequence of just selects of this specific action, what this person does, and then you pull from it like a string. You just pull from those moments and sprinkle it in the movie. So anything you could do, any moment, any frame, fraction of a frame, you know, is just like is important to because it could be that much more worse of clearly for acting if it's like one frame too short. It's like, oh, I don't feel emotional enough, you know. It's and it literally it's frame by frame. Like you have to be fully aware of that. Every frame makes a difference without a doubt. But yeah, you steal. I would say that's the answer. Is you steal from areas in the movie and find performance where it's best, and oftentimes it's outside of the take.
Yeah. So I really like what you said. You know, you pull selects and then figure out which parts to use, which ones to sprinkle in between, you know, here and there in the movie. And something that's kind of related is like how editing has changed from back then to, you know, how it is like right now. So back then it was mostly about cuts and transitions, but now with nonlinear editing, you can basically pull everything up, put it on a timeline, you know, scramble through to and fro, and also you can add zooms, camera shakes. We spoke about this.
Yeah.
What do you do? You know, as an editor, how do you think nonlinear editing in this way has helped make movies more dynamic, I guess?
You know, it's advantageous and disadvantageous, as some filmmakers would say, because sometimes really work a cut too much to where it's overkill and it doesn't need it. So sometimes limitation actually becomes more creative when you're limited, and that's in the film. That's the case where you have a very specific amount of time and you're on the clock, and it's like you're on the clock now too, but it's just much faster and rapid pace because they want multiple versions, not just one. Usually you're just building towards one version at that time until like a milestone screening or a feedback or something, and then you go back in. But for like, you know, destructive editing and reconstructive editing, however you want to call it, for nonlinear, it's very helpful to get to show an idea as fast as possible, so you know it doesn't work, you can put it away. So you can go to the next idea. So that's what's advantageous, is the immediacy of that, you know, the context of whatever it is the director wants to see or the producer wants to see or whomever is in charge, you know, studio person, whatever. But you could show them right there how something work and not work that fast, and then move on to the next, where that will save time for other things, right? So that's the advent of digital. That's, you know, that's how it's helpful. And yeah, not helpful is sometimes people just work it too much for too long to a point where they get lost, you know, where they're not focusing on, they're not taking time, and you're noticing that like today where it's like a frame for 3 frames here, 5. Like if you go back to Bad Boys 1 and go to his stuff now, you will guarantee you see that was filmed, right? I think it was.
Yeah.
Filmed.
It was filmed.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he shot that at film. Because Advent of Evan didn't really come until the late 90s. So maybe mid to late, like Lightstorm was anyway. Yeah, if you can see the progression from Bad Boys to now, where the rapid pace, and that is a lot of it is 2 things. It's digital editing, access to editing, and you want to move on quickly because you can. Why not? Because you can. And the other is the generation. Generations used to be, is like, you know, it was at one point the MTV generation, and then it progressed to the generation it is now, where it's like ADD, you know, where they get lost. That attention span is very minimal, and that's unfortunately most of, fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately because it can move the story forward. On some directors that like take their time and it's like, all right, come on, Ray, you're stretching this out a little too long. This is self-indulgent. You know what I mean? Whereas other times it's like, I really don't feel anything for that character anymore. So it's a give and take. It's really hard to figure that out. As long as you're not your own worst enemy, you know, with digital editing, and just be aware, cognizant of what you're doing at all times. So you're not just throwing out ideas out there just for the sake of. You have time to experiment, but just be careful not to detract from your vision of what you always foresaw this product to be.
So given the the amount of freedom that you have now with basically nonlinear editing, like how fast you can move around, how does this compare when you edit like a massive franchise blockbuster?
Before you even ask that, that's another good point. Is that the good thing about digital editing? I'll just quickly add is the mechanics of it, right? So you can add like you said, a zoom or a tilt or camera angle. You have all these effects that are temporary and transitions. That is when it's really, that is so helpful now these days, because you could see you could blow something up and you really don't know, because you could go into create an object or something, it'll take however long to see it, the immediacy of the dynamics that you want to enhance. And sometimes you're enhancing something that is so bare, nothing frankly needs an elevation of sorts. So that habit is actually really helpful, especially for visual effects and keying out backgrounds very quickly and seeing the context of certain things. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to add that it was very helpful to use the tools of the effects palette in Avid.
100%, yeah. Because I employ the same techniques like on and off when it comes to editing action. Like I find that really helpful.
Yeah.
But when it comes to my previous question, like editing a massive franchise blockbuster versus an independent film, how has technology like helped you out? Has it made things easier, or I think what I'm trying to ask you is like, what are the main differences when it comes to editing a massive tentpole feature versus a more independent film?
I mean, I really approach things the same way. My work ethic, it doesn't change at any stretch. It's the same, whether it's a large project or a small project. Like Russo Avengers, I work just as hard. Sometimes you work harder on smaller things because you don't have as many resources that you would have on larger scale projects where you can delegate to multiple people certain tasks, specific tasks.
Okay.
But generally for me, I'm very self-sufficient. So I only lean on my assistants for every editor's different, just like every director's different how they work with their editor. But I'm very self-sufficient in terms of like I do a lot of things myself. The sound work, the music, I do all of that myself. Sometimes I've assisted editors where they lean heavily on the assistant to do all that, and actually that I was confident enough to just go on and do my thing. I'm just gonna look. I gotta cut something. I gotta get to editing as quickly as possible, which is a very hard transition to make. And it's still. I mean, I'm still doing it. I'm in the middle of that transition. You caught me to. So I commend you for reaching out to me. You have so many previous people in your show who are just icons and obviously have gone through the ropes. But yeah, they could empathize with where I'm coming from. But yeah, you approach things the same way as long as your organization is top notch, and that starts with the assistants getting the dailies to the editor and making sure that is, and you come up with a system because every editor has a specific way that they want their. I'll use Avid as an example. Avid bin, scene bin, organized so that it's easy for the editor to take and just run with it. So it starts there really to really feel comfortable where you are in crafting what you're doing. But my approach typically is, I like line breakdowns for every, doesn't matter the dialogue on a large scale or small scale. I would break down each moment of the scene, I would read the script first, and I'd see, okay, where, you know, A to B to B to C to C to D, and those moments I would just build in like sequences so that they're like my selects essentially, right? And I would start crafting the scene from that. But I would start there for my foundation for structure to work with.
Gotcha.
It's
Right.
important for large. Sometimes, like an editor for some Oscar-winning whatever it is, I'll just any movie that's Oscar-winning, something that doesn't require as many visual effects, might not be. You'd think like, oh, they're the best there is, but anything. Not necessarily the case, because they could be a bad mixture when you put them in a world of like a visual effects virtual world. There's a lot to learn, so you have to understand how to work with pre-visualization, post-visualization. We talked about this too, where previs usually is storyboards before you go and shoot, so that the producer and the director understands the composition and he directs, okay, this is what's going to ultimately end up coming. It changes, obviously, it evolves like anything, but it's a good shape for the producer also to know what equipment they're going to need. Crane, what is this going to be a digital double takeover for stunts, you know, and stuff like that. So it's helpful for everybody for animated storyboard. You don't really do that on independent. You need to do that for the effect because the amount of people involved that have to get the job at the end of the day. So, so if you're looking at something like, you know, any MCU or Avengers or what have you, you'll be starting with previs, and you'll be cutting the live action, and also you'll have to be you're the first sort of line of defense for directing the post in a lot of ways of how to construct a shot of what happens within a shot. Like Hulk obviously is CG creature. It's a CG character, fully CG character. So you have to imagine. A lot of it is leaving it to the imagination for visuals and timing of thing, understanding how to use visual effects plates, which is just basically dailies for your viewers if you're not so aware. It's basically dailies that are empty shots that is going to be composited in the foreground, right? It is essentially a background element to be used. So it's important to be knowledgeable of how to use that and when to use that, because some people would look at that like and I'll say like an Oscar-winning editor, I don't know who, but somebody who's, I won't say any names or anything, but I'll just say like there could be they're used to a very specific kind of narrative, which doesn't require as many visuals, so they're not as experienced. So even though some people would be like, oh, that person would be way better than this person who's actually more visual effects to do, and then it ends up becoming a situation where they're let go, you know, and from the project because they can't keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, or in terms of communication with the visual effects department, because you have to be respectful of them as you guys are going hand, you know, visual effects supervisor. A lot of times, VFX on those large scale films, they dictate a lot of the schedule, so you're kind of at the mercy in a lot of ways because the timing to turn around. You know, these massive action sequences takes a year or months to do. You know, ILM or Weta Digital or what have you.
Sorry, so a quick question. When it came to, you know, just let's talk about Thor. That was the first MCU movie that you worked on.
Yeah.
So taking Thor into consideration, back in 2011, 10, 11, I guess, you guys were working on this? Yeah. I read it came out in 2011, so I'm assuming you guys were working on it in 2010.
Yeah, I started on 2000. It was actually one of the longer films I've ever worked on. It was like
okay. Yeah. So from back in 2010 or 11, working on Thor, to coming all the way down to the Avengers in 2012, how did the editing process change? Because like you're dealing with one particular character and his story, and then you come to, you know, something like the Avengers, you have multiple characters. It's basically like an ensemble film. How does that process change, man?
Joss Whedon. You have to, and he works so well with an ensemble, obviously, as we know from his, you know, previous works, Serenity, Uncut, and Building Up. But yeah, no, it really, he sort of is the sort of building block for all these, you know, for everybody afterwards, and DCU as well, and whatnot. But a lot of it is orchestrated by, it starts with the director, and but it's the editor's job to help find that balance. Like in a complicated action scene, you could be with one character, like, what's a good example? Um, when Hawkeye, for instance, is on the roof and he fires the arrow, and you have this long tie-in shot, it actually brings everybody together. So you have these moments where it's like choreography, moments within the frame of carrying you from one place to another. And Avengers was the first time to do that, and which is why it was so exciting. But you have to, as an editor, also, because you don't have those long shots, you have to find a balance of, okay, I've been with this character for way too long. And you have to always ask yourself, the audience, like, you have to look at this. Sometimes you have to just step away and try and look at it as objectively as possible, which is very hard to do when you're working on a movie for a year. So
you become snowblind.
That's why you screen the movie and test it, so you get perspective to help guide you. Because it's like, okay, I'm at this point, I don't know, it looks good to me. It just so. And there's however so many ways you can skin a cat and end up with the same result nonetheless. Because
Do you refer to the script at any point during the edit? Do you specifically ask an editor to do that?
Once you're cutting, after you've already built the edit, not really.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's no need, because you've already built something that's an immediate representation of what the script is, audio visual representation. So you don't really go back to it. You hardly go back. Anytime you go back to it, if you do reshoots and pickups, and then you have new pages and understand what goes where. And then you have to read, temp ADR lines or something if it needs to fill the space, as a guide for the shoot or what have you. But no, I wouldn't really. And surprisingly enough, we talked about this too. There's a Chinese film I cut called Asura. Another massive $110 million film.
I still couldn't find that, man. I've been searching for it.
Oh God, I'm looking myself.
Nowhere.
I didn't have a script at all for the edit. Like, there was, they don't use script supervisors for Chinese filmmaking.
What?
At least for this production, they didn't.
Okay.
And I had to basically train script supervisors via a virtual conversation with them. And I'd be like, okay, this is your job. This is what you have to do. This is what I need. Your job is basically to aid me, to help me, because I'm not the eyes on the ground there with the director, and he's so busy he can't tell me everything that's going on. So on a daily basis, that's your job. So I had to basically teach them or train them, and eventually they figured it out. But the problem is with scripts, it's so important to have a script supervisor that is just on it and give you the stuff as quickly as possible, because I could get dailies before I get the page. Then at that point, oftentimes I cut the scene before I receive pages. So it's pointless sometimes. And for Asura, it was a unique situation where they were so late in delivering things that I couldn't. I just cut with what I had in my. And again, that's where imagination is so important for visual effects, and that's where a script is actually aligned important, because the director. It's a way for the editor to understand, okay, this plate is for this moment, this plate is for that moment. But I didn't really have that luxury cutting that. And on top of it being in Mandarin, I mean, it was just, I had to sort of figure it out for myself. I had to look at everything and be like, okay, this feels right for this moment on the geography plane of everything. This is where this needs to be, and this is the action that has to take place here, and this is the CG creature that goes here, and then goes to here, so on and so forth. And it's all about constructing within the resources you have provided. But I have that luxury. So, for a script, the only time I go to it is during the assembly of the film, and it's just to know what's important is to know what the selects are as well, what the circle takes are. Director, because that's what the person on the spot was like, this feels great, this is it, this is great. But oftentimes, I don't just use the circle take, I use what feels natural to me. And then you go I start with that, and I look at it, and I'm like, okay, why did this director like prefer this? First of all, you have to watch everything. You have to know all your material. Nobody's as intimately involved with the footage as the editor. I don't care what director says, but the editor knows it from back to bottom, top to side, every which way. You can imagine. One person is an exception, is Michael. Actually, Michael Bay knows everything. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
He remembers everything. It's amazing. It's actually it's incredible.
That's great.
And he's one of the only directors that really I know would know all the material. It's impossible.
So sorry to interject. So we are kind of in the last 15, actually the last 12 minutes. So if the audience has any questions, they can actually drop them in the comment section.
Okay.
Guys. Please feel free to. And we also do have some questions from Facebook, basically from people who aren't able to join today. So here goes one. So how do you maintain a certain director's style through the edit, and how much of your style makes its way into the edit?
Oh, I think so. That question just at the beginning of it was a little muffled, but it was the director style and editor style, and how do you put them together, right? Well, it's not a matter of putting them together. I think a lot of it is before you work with the director, study up, do your research, and you can notice a pattern of their style. That's why it's a style. It's their particular style, right? Quote, quote. And then as you're cutting it, it's instinctual for you to cut in your own style. A lot of times you want to, abide by the rules of whatever that director prefer in his pattern, but a lot of times you end up doing you just do what feels right to you as an editor. It has to feel like something that you stand behind confidently. And by doing so, it's instinctual for you to bring your own style. You just don't even, so it's an invisible art it's labeled invisible art for a reason. Like there's a lot of things that go in there that people have no idea how it's gotten there. And it's a combination of the director's shooting style and composition of shots and his own pattern, his own ways, and choosing his or her own moments. There's a high speed or slow-mo at this moment, or a camera pushing at this moment, a dolly moment here. So you know their moments, and that's what you shape around. But at the same time, you bring a lot of ideas to the table that the director, that is my goal, is you're not just the hands for hire. They hired you for a reason. They hired you to sort of put in for your input as well, and your own style, because it's hard. Everybody can cut things. Like you and I could get the same footage and it will be a different product. Everybody cuts things differently, or imagine it to be differently. Even if it's slight, it's still different. But it's that one moment, that one frame that may emphasize one moment over another. So for me, when I get the material and I work with it, it's just it's a natural feeling, a natural sense, where sometimes and there are times where I always start with an idea first, the foundation of what the director envisioned first.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to find a time, not a lot of people do this, but I do this. But I try to find the time to have an alternate cut as well for an idea, like an experiment. So, try this. Sometimes you can't do that in small pieces. You have to do it in the larger sum of the feature. In terms of a practical standpoint, some things will feel better if you move this moment, the B moment before the whatever, or the A moment.
Basically, rearrange.
Yeah, and that a lot of that is experimentation with time. It all depends on how much time you have, and that's why I said it was crucial in the assembly to have, the best assembly you could possibly have. Sound, music, it is fully fleshed out so that they can imagine as though it's on a big screen. And it's like, this is presentable. Like, you have to show something that's presentable so that you have more time in the director's cut to experiment. That is why. So that you're not just trying to figure it out to build the assembly and eating away the director's 10 weeks, So that's important. But yeah, I'm rambling on for his style question. But yeah, it's it's instinctual for you to just do your own thing. It's what makes it feel right. And I can't even explain my own thing. It's just because every scene, every moment, every movie, as you know, under the scope, under the microscope, is approached differently. You know, I could have one idea about something before I go into a movie, and then I get the footage from reading the script. I have one feeling, and then I get the footage, and it's completely something else. Better for the better or for the worse, I don't know. So we're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Oh no. Or it's like, oh, I love that there. That's a good moment there. Let's push that. Let's push it even more. And I didn't think that was a moment in the script when I read it during the scripting stage. So there's a lot of things that it's evolution of sorts. You know, you're always learning as you.
Kind of like you're going with the flow again, right? Like as it comes.
Yeah, as the flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just go with the flow, and you go with what feels right, what feels natural, and a lot of times it's things that you didn't imagine initially. You have to just be open-minded, really. So don't be so, oh, I thought about this one way, so it has to be that way. No, play with it a little bit. I mean, you're just so fortunate to have this footage in front of you to play with. It's like a playground. For me, it's like a playground. So, a toy box, you know. So it's.
Very sorry to cut you short right there.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's all about the time constraint. So I kind of forgot to ask this question before, but you recently worked with the Russo Brothers, the directors of Avengers, Infinity War, Endgame,
Yeah.
Winter Soldier, and what you edited was like not a movie, but you were working on the Russo Brothers Pizza Film School. So that was basically where you bring on different guests, kind of like Junkyard Theory, but you go on for like way longer. So how was it cutting that for the Russo Brothers as opposed to, you know, cutting a movie?
Oh, one word, educational. It was great. I mean, it's great. Hey, you guys want to save yourselves $100 plus or $200, whatever, $1,000? Just watch Russo Brothers, season 1 here, because it is so educational, so informative, so insightful, brilliantly laid out in terms of how to build the story, right? And using the obviously the typical, not the typical, but the standard, 3-act structure that we're most familiar with. But they break it down into like minute pieces where you really they dissect it for every episode, and having input obviously from their guest speakers as well is great and very insightful. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was fun. It's unlike anything I've ever done. And I mean, I've done like documentary stuff before. I remember I ended up cutting, like, when I first started out to get in the Editors Guild, I cut this locally broadcasted cop TV show. And that's where I first figured out how to create a narrative from just dailies, basically, like a documentary.
Yeah.
You know, and the ride-alongs and stuff. And you make it like much bigger than it really is. The off-camera stuff, like there's a gunshot there, but I can steal somebody's reaction to doing this, and it's like, oh my god, it's exciting. So that's where that was, before I got into this, but that was a way for me to be like, okay, just reiterate that absolutely what I wanted to do. And the Russos, it was great working with. I typically work with his daughter, actually, Sophia Russo, and she's fantastic. Joe would know, obviously, but it was minimal because the turnaround was so fast. They would shoot these things, and like overnight, I'd have to turn them around. So I would prepare, like anything. Preparation is so important, by the way, for everybody. The more prepared you are, the sort of less, I guess, sort of stressed or disorientation, I'll say, when this stuff comes, you'll feel, because I know what episode or what movie they're going to critique going into it, and however much time I have between that, between when they tell me and they shoot the episode and they give me the dailies, which could be it's less than a week usually. It's just, a couple days. It's very fast. I would watch the movie and break that down. I'd be like, okay, this person says this, I know something they're going to probably talk about. And I break that down in my timeline and type it out so it's like a database for me that's searchable. And then This is going beyond probably your question. I don't even know. But and I could also pull things.
You're
just
enjoying
knowing
yourself. I
want.
like that.
Yeah, and knowing them and knowing what they want. Again, this is a relationship with the director too. Is you have enough experience with them. At first, you're hesitant because you're like, I'm not sure how far I can go with this. I never worked with the person. And then once you get comfortable and get initial notes from it, it's like, okay, now I know what they're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to start using that as a foundation to start with for pulling elements or resources that I need to prepare me to cut the episode. So, you look at something like Back to the Future is the last episode, right? That luckily one of my favorites, all-time favorites. So I know the movie like the back of my hand already. I could probably read the script.
Yeah.
I could probably just riff off all the lines from start to finish. But still, it's a movie that I would bring into the Avid, and I would break down every moment that I know is going to be searchable for them to talk about, so I could just pop right to it. So I could turn this stuff around as quickly as possible. And I knew they wanted behind-the-scenes stuff, so I would go find photos, behind-the-scenes, specials on the DVDs, special
Basically,
features.
you collect all the material that you need in order to,
all the material I need to be ready, so that when the footage comes, everything's like dropping it in. Boom, boom, boom.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of times, actually, I hate to give away some of my tricks, but sometimes but it's educational purposes. It's all good. So, but a lot of times what I do is when I read a script, believe it or not, I technically score the movie before I even get footage.
Oh.
Because a lot of times, because when you sit with something from start to finish as it progresses.
One moment, we are in the last minute actually, so
No!
running out of time, man. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll quickly say that I would basically score the movie before it even gets shot, because you're sitting with it from start to finish, and you know the progression of characters, and the story, and the plot, and the act. So, and audibly, it's more a succinct way to sort of work and understand where the story goes, as opposed to in pieces and fragments. Go ahead. Next question, or wrapping it up.
I'm not sure if we do have time because it's like the last 22 seconds. But man, this has been so educational. I think we're gonna have to go for like round 2. So hopefully very soon. But Tommy, thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you on another session. But until such time, it's bye bye from Junkyard Theory.
I love it.